Get your hands off the machine, Arthur. You're done here. I quietly packed my toolset and walked out. They wanted my molds and they had them. Now, they just had to figure out how to stop the alarm that was about to ring. 3 months before, the factory floor at Apex Precision Parts in Michigan was running at peak efficiency. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I'm 52 years old, and for 22 of those years, I've been the head of tooling and molding here. If you drive a modern American truck or SUV, there's a 90% chance the steering collet connector, the high-strength, glass-filled nylon joint that keeps your steering wheel connected to the rack, was stamped and cured under my watch. It's a part with a tolerance threshold of less than 5 microns. If it's off by even the thickness of a human hair, the joint binds, the steering locks, and the vehicle manufacturer faces a federal recall. I lived and breathed this shop floor. I knew the exact thermal expansion rate of the tool steel H13 dies. I could tell if a hydraulic press was dropping pressure just by the hum of the pumps from 30 yards away. But my position at Apex was unique. Back in 2008, during the height of the automotive crisis, Apex was on the brink of bankruptcy. The founder, Richard Caldwell, was a decent man, but he could not pay my salary, let alone the $300,000 needed to design and machine the custom multi-cavity injection molds for their new steering collet contract. I made Richard a proposal. I had inherited some family land and had a decent nest egg. I told him I would establish an independent entity, Pendleton Tooling Design LLC. My LLC would personally fund, design, own, and maintain the custom molds. I would lease them back to Apex for a flat fee of $15,000 a month. In exchange, I would remain on as their head of tooling at a standard salary to oversee production. Because I was a director-level employee, we had to do this strictly by the book to avoid any future conflict of interest claims. Our corporate attorney at the time, Harold Vance, made sure of it. The transaction was fully disclosed, reviewed, and approved by a disinterested board of directors under Section 450.1545A of the Michigan Business Corporation Act. It was an arm's-length transaction, recorded in the official board minutes and fully protected by the business judgment rule. For 14 years, that contract sat in a blue folder in the corporate archives, quiet and undisputed. Then, Richard had a mild stroke, and his family decided it was time for him to step down. Enter Ryan Caldwell. Ryan was Richard's 31-year-old nephew. He arrived fresh off a 2-year stint at a Chicago consulting firm with a brand new MBA, a tailored suit that looked ridiculously out of place on our oil-stained floor, and an absolute obsession with lean manufacturing. Ryan wanted to make a name for himself, and he needed to show a 15% reduction in operational costs before the annual shareholder meeting to secure his position. To Ryan, the factory was not a place where men and women bent metal and cured polymers. It was just a series of cells on a spreadsheet that needed to be squeezed for margin. During his first week, Ryan walked the floor with an iPad, tracking my technicians. He did not ask about the cycle times or the cooling line pressures. He asked why my operators took 15-minute breaks and why we kept $50,000 worth of spare copper electrodes in lockup. It's called preventive maintenance, Ryan, I told him, wiping grease from my hands. If a hot runner manifold blows on a Tuesday night, those electrodes are the difference between a 4-hour fix and a 3-week shutdown. Ryan did not smile. He just tapped his screen. In modern logistics, Arthur, we call that trapped capital. We need to transition to just-in-time inventory. I knew then we were going to have problems. But the real storm started when Ryan hired Brenda Stark as the new director of human resources. Brenda was a corporate hatchet woman whose entire career consisted of rewriting employee handbooks, slashing healthcare benefits, and restructuring veteran contracts to claw back intellectual property. Within a month, Ryan and Brenda had set up a war room in the executive suite. They started auditing the company's historical accounts. It did not take them long to find the blue folder. It was a Thursday afternoon when I was summoned to the main office. Ryan was sitting behind Richard's old oak desk, which had been replaced by a minimalist glass table. Brenda sat next to him, a thick stack of papers in front of her. Harold Vance, our veteran corporate counsel, sat in the corner looking uncomfortable. "Sit down, Arthur," Ryan said, not looking up from his laptop. I sat. I did not take off my safety glasses. "We've been reviewing the operational expenditures for the tooling department." Ryan began, turning the screen toward me. "Can you explain why Apex is paying $15,000 a month to a vendor called Pendleton Tooling Design LLC? It's the lease fee for the Model S steering collet molds," I said calmly. I own the patents, and my LLC owns the physical tooling dies. Apex leases them to run the production line. Ryan let out a dry, condescending laugh. Arthur, you're an employee of Apex. Having an employee lease proprietary equipment back to the company at a markup is a massive conflict of interest. It's an administrative anomaly we cannot tolerate. It's not an anomaly, I replied. It's a legally binding contract approved by a disinterested board of directors in 2008 under Michigan Business Corporation Act, Section 450.1545A. It was fully disclosed, and it saved this company from bankruptcy. Ryan waved his hand dismissively. That was a different era, Arthur. Under our new corporate governance guidelines, all intellectual property and manufacturing equipment used on-site must be wholly owned by Apex Precision Parts. We've drafted an IP transfer agreement. We're offering you $10,000 for the outright purchase of the patents and physical molds. I looked at the document, then looked at Ryan. $10,000 for $500,000 worth of precision H13 steel and patented designs. This is a joke. It's not a joke, Arthur, Ryan said, his tone hardening. It's a transition. You can sign the transfer agreement, keep your job, and we'll fold your leasing fee into a one-time bonus. Or we can take another route. We terminate your employment, void the lease under a material breach of our new conflict of interest policy, and keep the molds anyway. After all, they're physically inside our facility. Harold Vance cleared his throat from the corner. Ryan, I've advised you that Arthur's contract is legally sound. Under Michigan law, a unilateral policy change cannot retroactively invalidate a board-approved bilateral commercial agreement. Ryan shot Harold a sharp look. I'm the VP of Operations, Harold. I run the P&L. If Arthur wants to sue us, he can try. But by the time he gets a court date, the Model S contract will be complete. Ryan turned back to me. You have until 9 tomorrow morning, Arthur. If that paper is not signed and on my desk by then, we'll consider it a voluntary resignation, and we will secure the shop floor. I stood up. I did not touch the pen. I need 24 hours to run this by my legal counsel, I said. I spent that evening in a brick-walled conference room in downtown Detroit, sitting across from Marcus Sterling. Marcus was 60, wore bespoke three-piece suits, and had spent his entire career defending automotive suppliers and patent holders. Marcus turned the pages of my original 2008 tooling lease agreement. The paper was slightly yellowed, but the ink was crisp. Ryan Caldwell is playing a very dangerous game with cards he has not read, Marcus said, tapping a finger on the contract. This is the Keyman lease termination clause we drafted. It's ironclad. A company cannot unilaterally write an employee code of conduct that invalidates a pre-existing bilateral commercial contract approved under Section 450.1545A of the Michigan Business Corporation Act. If they fire you, the lease terminates automatically, and they must cease all use of the tooling and return the physical dies to you within 5 business days. What about their threat to keep the molds? I asked. If they keep running those molds after they fire you, they are committing willful patent infringement and conversion of property, Marcus said. I'll have the formal cease and desist letter ready to be served the moment they execute the termination. At 9 the next morning, I walked up the metal stairs to the executive suite. Ryan was standing by the window. Brenda was already seated at the glass table, the same IP transfer document lying in the center like a trap. Harold Vance, the corporate counsel, was conspicuously absent. Ryan turned around. Morning, Arthur. I assume you brought the signed agreement? I sat down, pulled a pen from my pocket, and placed it on the table. But I did not touch the paper. I'm not signing it, Ryan. Ryan's face darkened instantly. Arthur, we gave you a generous offer. $10,000 is more than fair for some old steel blocks. Those steel blocks are high-precision tooling dies that generate 80% of this plant's revenue, I said. And they belong to my LLC. If you want to buy them, the price is $3 million. Otherwise, the lease remains $15,000 a month. Ryan walked over to the table and slammed his hand down. You don't dictate terms to me. You're an employee. You work for Apex. You do what we tell you to do, or you're out. Brenda intervened, her voice cold and measured. Arthur, your refusal to sign this agreement constitutes a direct conflict of interest under Section 4.2 of the Employee Code of Conduct. It also represents willful insubordination. We have no choice but to terminate your employment immediately. She slid the termination notice toward me. It was a termination for cause, meaning I was not eligible for severance, and my remaining 20,000 restricted stock units that were scheduled to vest next month were forfeited. I picked up the notice. I read it carefully. I took my pen, wrote signed under protest and reserving all legal rights at the bottom, and signed my name. Ryan sneered. The molds stay in press 4. We're going to keep running them because we have a contract with Detroit Motor Group. If you try to sue us, our corporate lawyers will drag this out in court for the next 5 years. You'll be bankrupt before we even get to a deposition. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. The lease is officially terminated as of this moment, Ryan. My lawyer will be in touch. I walked down to my office in the tooling shop. I grabbed my personal toolbox, a heavy red steel chest filled with my private micrometers, my custom-ground calibration pins, and the handwritten notebooks containing the thermal expansion offsets for every mold we ran. These were tools I had accumulated over 30 years. They were mine. Dave and 2 other technicians watched in silence as I loaded the toolbox onto a handcart. "What's going on, Art?" Dave asked, his face pale. "I've been let go, Dave," I said quietly. "Gary is taking over the department. Just do your job, and remember the thermocouple on press 4. I wheeled the cart out to the loading dock, lifted the toolbox into the bed of my truck, and closed the tailgate. As I drove out of the parking lot, I checked my rearview mirror. The cooling towers were still venting steam, and the factory hummed on. Within an hour of my departure, Ryan called Gary, the junior automation engineer, into his office. "Gary, you're the new head of tooling," Ryan said, pacing behind his desk. "Arthur's lawyer is going to try to file a lawsuit, which means we need to build up our inventory of the Model S steering collets as fast as possible. I want 45,000 units in the warehouse by next Friday. That's a 40% increase over our current schedule." Gary adjusted his glasses, looking nervous. "Ryan, the current molding cycle is 27 seconds. That includes a 15-second cooling dwell time. We need that time to ensure the glass-filled nylon resin crystallizes properly and maintains its tensile strength. If we speed it up, we risk introducing residual stress into the plastic." "I don't want excuses, Gary. I want optimization," Ryan said. Leaning over the desk, reduce the cooling dwell time to 9 seconds. That brings the total cycle down to 21 seconds. We'll hit the 45,000 target with days to spare. "But Ryan," Gary protested, "reducing the cooling time by 40% is dangerous. The internal spline teeth won't stabilize. Under high torque, they could shear. I run the P&L, Gary. I take the responsibility," Ryan snapped. He turned to his computer and typed rapidly. "I've just sent you an email ordering the cycle time reduction. That covers you. Now, go down there, override the PLC controller on press 4 and get the line running." Gary looked at his phone, saw the email notification, and nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir." He walked down to the shop floor, opened the control cabinet of press 4, and reprogrammed the cooling dwell time to 9 seconds. The massive press began to cycle faster, spitting out hot nylon collets every 21 seconds. They were hitting their numbers. The spreadsheet looked beautiful. But under the smooth black surface of the plastic, the molecular chains of the polymer were freezing under intense internal stress, waiting for a load they could no longer bear. The cease and desist notice was served to Apex's corporate registered agent at 11:30. Within 20 minutes, Harold Vance, the corporate counsel, was in Ryan's office. "You fired him for cause under a corporate policy we passed 3 weeks ago?" Harold's voice was incredulous. "Ryan, you've put this company in extreme legal jeopardy. Pendleton Tooling Design LLC is a separate legal entity. A unilateral HR policy cannot retroactively void a board-approved bilateral commercial contract approved under Section 450-1545A of the Michigan Business Corporation Act. It's Corporate Law 101. I don't care about the board minutes, Harold," Ryan snapped. "If we stop running those molds, we default on our contract with Detroit Motor Group. That's a $20 million liability. We have physical possession of the steel. File an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. We'll argue that stopping the line causes irreparable harm to the Michigan automotive supply chain. The court will grant it under public interest." Harold Vance complied, albeit reluctantly. By 4, Apex had filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order in the Oakland County Circuit Court, seeking to enjoin my LLC from taking physical possession of the molds and to allow Apex to continue using them. The next morning, Marcus Sterling and I sat on one side of the mahogany counsel table in court. On the other side sat Harold Vance and Ryan Caldwell. Harold Vance presented Apex's case first. He argued that Arthur's tooling was a single point of failure for a critical automotive component. "Your Honor, if this tooling is removed, Apex will be forced to stop shipments to Detroit Motor Group. The assembly plant will halt in 48 hours. costing millions of dollars a day and putting thousands of union workers out of work. The public interest demands that these molds remain in the Apex facility during litigation. Marcus Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He was perfectly calm. Your Honor, Apex is attempting to use the court to sanction the theft of my client's private property under the guise of public interest, Marcus said. He slid a thick binder of documents to the bailiff to present to the judge. We have submitted the original 2008 lease agreement, along with the official board minutes, showing that the lease was fully disclosed and approved by a disinterested board under Section 450.1545A. Apex has unilaterally declared this lease void, stopped paying the $15,000 monthly fee, and fired my client for cause, simply because he refused to sign over his patents for a pittance. Marcus turned to look at Ryan. They want to use my client's private, patented equipment for free, while refusing to pay the lease or honor the contract. That is an unconstitutional taking of private property. Judge Thorne reviewed the documents. She was a veteran judge who knew the automotive supplier landscape inside out. She leaned forward, looking at Harold Vance. Mr. Vance, does Apex intend to pay the $15,000 monthly lease fee during this litigation? She asked. Harold Vance cleared his throat. Your Honor, we argue the lease is void due to a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest that your own board approved 14 years ago in accordance with Michigan state law, Judge Thorne interrupted, her tone sharp. I'm not going to allow Apex to run a supplier's patented tooling for free. While you litigate a dispute you created, she tapped her pen on the bench. I will grant a temporary restraining order to prevent the immediate removal of the molds, but it is strictly conditional. She began dictating the order. First, Apex Precision Parts must immediately deposit all outstanding lease fees, plus a $500,000 security bond, into the court's escrow account within 48 hours to cover potential patent infringement damages. If the bond is not posted, the TRO is dissolved. Second, because these molds produce critical steering safety components, Apex must strictly comply with all IATF 16949 quality and safety certification standards. The court orders that every production batch run during the duration of this TRO must be fully audited, stress-tested, and certified by the Quality Assurance Department, led by Director Emily Vance, to ensure public safety. Third, this order is temporary, pending a full evidentiary hearing in 14 days. Ryan looked as if he had just swallowed a lemon. A $500,000 cash bond was a massive hit to their current cash flow, but Harold Vance whispered to him, and Ryan nodded. They had no choice. If they did not post the bond, the TRO would dissolve, and I would legally repossess the molds, stopping the factory immediately. Back at the plant, the atmosphere was suffocating. Ryan was furious about the bond. He walked down to the molding department, finding Gary standing near press 4. We posted the $500,000 bond, Gary, Ryan said, his voice tight. That means we are bleeding cash. We need to run this machine at maximum capacity. I want the 21-second cycle maintained 24 hours a day, Ryan, Gary said, pointing to the temperature display on press 4. The Zone 3 nozzle thermocouple is flickering constantly now. The barrel temperature is spiking to 280 degrees. The nylon is running too hot, and because we cut the cooling time to 9 seconds, the parts are coming out of the mold before they've fully crystallized. We need to shut down for 4 hours to replace the sensor and recalibrate. No downtime, Gary, Ryan snapped. We have a court order allowing us to run, and we are going to run. Adjust the coolant flow to compensate, but do not stop the press. That's an order. Gary looked at the machine, then at the email on his phone. He adjusted the water valves, trying to cool the mold faster, but he knew it was a losing battle. The H13 steel mold was hot, the polymer was breaking down, and the microsplines inside the steering collets were freezing under internal stress, ready to fail. For 3 days, Press 4 slammed out parts at a furious pace. The warehouse shelves filled with pallets of steering collets, all stamped from the molds that legally belonged to my LLC. On Tuesday morning, Emily Vance, the quality assurance director, stood in the testing lab. It was time for the routine daily verification of batch 1104, 12,000 units destined for Detroit Motor Group's assembly plant. Emily placed the first sample collet from the batch into the hydraulic torque testing rig. The industrial actuator engaged, applying rotational force to the internal spline teeth of the connector. The digital gauge climbed, 30 Newton meters, 3540. With a sharp crack, the spline sheared. The metal indicator dropped, 45 Newton meters. Emily's eyes widened. The specification sheet pinned to the wall was clear. Minimum torque threshold, 90 Newton meters. Safe operating limit, 110. She pulled another sample from the bin and locked it into the clamp. The machine hissed. The spline stripped at 42 Newton meters. The third failed at 40. She sliced one of the failed collets in half and placed it under the digital microscope. Under the magnification, the horror was clear. Instead of a solid, uniform crystalline structure, the interior of the glass-filled nylon spline was porous, filled with microscopic air bubbles and void pockets. The polymer had frozen under intense internal stress because the cooling time had been cut by 40% and the nozzle temperature had been running 20 degrees too hot. Emily immediately logged onto her terminal in the ERP system. She generated a formal non-conformance report, tagging batch 1104 with a high-priority quality lock. In the shipping department, the ERP system automatically blocked the generation of shipping manifests for the quarantined pallets. They were legally locked on the warehouse floor. Within 10 minutes, Ryan Caldwell burst into the quality lab. "Vance, why is there a shipping hold on batch 1104? Ryan demanded. His face flushed. "The trucks are scheduled to load in 2 hours. Get that hold off the system." "I'm not releasing it, Ryan," Emily said, pointing to the sheared parts on the bench. "Look at the torque test. The splines are failing at 45 Newton meters. That's less than half the safety limit. If we ship these and one shears while an SUV is driving on the highway, the driver will lose all steering control. It's a catastrophic safety failure." "They look perfectly fine," Ryan said, picking up one of the black plastic pieces. "It's a minor tolerance variation. We'll adjust the machines on the next run. But we have to ship this batch tonight, or we face a $500,000 penalty for delaying production." "I am not signing off on this," Emily said, her voice steady. "It violates quality standards, and under the court order from Judge Thorne, we are legally required to maintain quality compliance. If I sign this, I face personal liability for safety fraud. If you don't release the lock, I'll find a QA director who will," Ryan threatened, leaning over her desk. "If you fire me, Ryan." "I want it in writing," Emily replied, looking him in the eye. "And I will deliver a copy of my safety log to the Board of Directors Audit Committee before I leave the building." Ryan stared at her, realized she wasn't bluffing, and let out a harsh breath. He turned on his heel and stormed back to the executive suite. Desperate to avoid the shipping penalty and believing he could solve the quality issue on the next batch, Ryan sat behind his desk. He opened his administrative terminal on the ERP system. Because he was the VP of Operations, his profile possessed master administrator credentials. He navigated to the non-conformance report for batch 1104. He clicked the Administrator Override button. The system displayed a warning box confirming the override of the quality assurance lock and indicating that this action would be permanently recorded in the system audit log. Ryan didn't hesitate. He clicked Confirm, typed in his executive password, and manually authorized the shipment under his own name. But Ryan did not understand how modern automotive ERP systems work. As a supplier, Apex's ERP system was linked directly to DMG's supplier quality database via an active API portal. The interface was programmed with a safety trigger. If an active quality assurance lock on a critical safety component was manually overridden by a non-QA administrator, the API automatically transmitted an immediate non-compliance and safety alert to DMG's headquarters. Within minutes of the trucks pulling out of the Apex loading dock, the red flag went live on DMG's compliance dashboard. When the shipping containers arrived at the assembly gates, the DMG quality team was already waiting. They rejected the shipment at the gate, refusing to let the pallets touch their floor. They pulled 10 samples from the trucks, ran them through their own stress tests, and confirmed the torque failures. The reaction was instantaneous. DMG issued a quality hold, stopping the assembly line and suspending all active payments to Apex Precision Parts. The portal notice was sent to Harold Vance, all shipments suspended, immediate on-site audit scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning. Apex is held liable for all line stoppage damages. At 5, my phone rang. "Arthur, you saboteur." Ryan's voice screamed through the receiver. He was out of breath, hysterical. "You called them. You told them about the molds. You've ruined this company." I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the snow falling outside. "I didn't call anyone, Ryan. You had a quality director who did her job, and you chose to override the safety locks on a digital system. In our industry, the system is the auditor. You signed your own warrant when you typed in your password." "I'll have you arrested," Ryan shrieked. I'll sue you for every penny of the bond. Talk to my lawyer, Ryan, I said calmly, and hung up. The next morning at 9, the emergency meeting was called in the main conference room of Marcus Sterling Detroit office. The atmosphere was quiet and cold. On one side of the mahogany table sat Arthur Pendleton and Marcus Sterling. On the other side sat Harold Vance, the chief corporate counsel for Apex, and the members of the board of directors. In the center sat Richard Caldwell, the founder of the company. His face was pale from his recent stroke, but his eyes were sharp and filled with a cold fury. Ryan Caldwell and Brenda Stark sat at the far end of the table. Ryan's designer suit looked crumpled, and his hands were trembling slightly. Brenda sat in rigid silence, her laptop closed. Richard Caldwell looked at his nephew. Ryan, you spent 2 years in business school and 2 years at a consulting firm, and you thought you could run a manufacturing plant. You thought a factory was just a spreadsheet where you could cut corners and squeeze margins without consequence. You overrode a safety lock on a steering component. You committed gross negligence and exposed this company to criminal liability under federal safety standards. Uncle Richard, I did it to save the delivery schedule. Ryan began, his voice cracking. Shut your mouth, Ryan, Richard said, his voice quiet but absolute. You nearly destroyed in 3 months what took me 40 years to build. Harold Vance cleared his throat, sliding a folder across the table. Arthur Marcus, we are not here to negotiate. We know the position we are in. The digital audit trail from the ERP system is irrefutable. It shows Ryan's credentials and IP address overriding Emily's quality quarantine. DMG has suspended our supplier agreement, and they are preparing a $20 million lawsuit for assembly line stoppage damages. The only way DMG will lift the suspension and accept parts is if the tooling lease is recertified and Arthur returns to oversee the production process. Marcus Sterling slid our restructuring proposal across the table. These are the non-negotiable terms for the resolution. Marcus read the terms from his screen. First, Ryan Caldwell and Brenda Stark will be terminated immediately for gross misconduct and negligence without severance or company payouts. Second, Arthur's termination for cause is rescinded and reclassified as a voluntary retirement with full benefits. All 20,000 of his unvested restricted stock units will vest immediately. Third, Apex Precision Parts will purchase the patents and the physical molds for the Model S steering collet connector from Pendleton Tooling Design LLC for the sum of $2,800,000. To accommodate Apex's current cash flow, this will be structured as an $800,000 upfront cash payment, with the remaining $2 million paid in 18 monthly installments, secured by a lien on the DMG contract receivables. Fourth, Arthur will be retained as chief technical consultant for a 12-month period at a rate of $35,000 per month, with a $150,000 signing bonus. He will have absolute authority over the tooling and quality assurance departments. Emily Vance will remain as QA director with complete independence. Ryan stood up, his face red with desperation. Uncle Richard, you're going to let them strip us of $2.8 million? It's a structured buyout that will choke our cash flow. It's a structured buyout that is the only thing keeping this company from bankruptcy, Ryan, Richard said. He looked at Harold Vance. Do we have the board's approval? The board has voted, Richard, Harold said, signing his name at the bottom of the document. We agreed to the terms. Richard Caldwell signed the document and handed it back to me. He then looked at Ryan and Brenda. Your security escorts are waiting at the front gates of the plant. Pack your personal belongings and leave the property immediately. Ryan and Brenda stood up, walked out of the room, and did not look back. The next morning at 8, I drove my truck back into the parking lot of the Apex plant. I walked onto the shop floor wearing my gray canvas jacket. Dave and the tooling crew were waiting for me near Press 4. Good to have you back, Art, Dave said, shaking my hand. The press is still down. What's the first step? First, replace the Zone 3 nozzle thermocouple, Dave, I said. Then open the PLC cabinet. We're changing the cooling dwell time back to 15 seconds. After that, we're adjusting the oil heater settings to compensate for the winter weather. I want a dry run by 10 on it, Dave said, a grin on his face. By noon, Press 4 was running again, humming with its familiar steady rhythm. The cycle time was back to 27 seconds, and the mold temperature was held at exactly 82 degrees Celsius. The steering collets came out smooth, clean, and structurally flawless. I took the first 10 parts from the bin, ran them through the quality lab myself, and watched the torque test needle climb past 90 Newton meters. holding steady until it hit 110 before shearing. The splines were solid, dense, and perfectly crystallized. I signed the compliance certificate, scanned it, and uploaded it to the portal. Within 20 minutes, the shipping hold was officially lifted, and the trucks were cleared to load. I walked out to the loading dock, watching the forklift drivers stack the pallets of certified steering collets onto the flatbeds. I was no longer an employee. I was an independent consultant, earning double my old salary, with nearly $3 million in the bank and complete control over the factory floor. The machines hummed in the background, a steady, powerful rhythm that had built my life. Ryan Caldwell had tried to treat the shop floor like a spreadsheet, forgetting that the real power of manufacturing does not lie in the numbers. It lies in the steel, the grease, and the people who know how to make them work.